Hello, we are continuing Sefer Chafetz Chaim, day 16. So, if in the context, when one speaks Lashon Hara, the victim that one spoke about is embarrassed, the speaker violates yet another prohibition. If Ruvain so greatly degrades Shimon with demeaning remarks such as those mentioned previously, or other similar remarks, in the presence of Shimon and others as well, to the extent that Shimon's face changes color and shame due to these remarks. Ruvain also violates the prohibition of do not bear a sin because of him. This is in Sefer Vayikra chapter 19 verse 7. For with this prohibition the Torah cautions everyone not to embarrass his fellow Jew, even in the context of admonishing him for committing a sin. Now, regarding the mitzvah of giving a rebuke, the Reb Chaim Volozhiner, the student of the Vilna Gaon, the Gra, writes that one does not, when giving rebuke, do not speak harshly, because harsh words are not heard, and that is true. I mean, that is everyone knows the validity that is true. One does not accept harsh words, so the Chaim Volozhiner says that speak rather in a soft manner, and only if the person's nature is that he can that there is no way he can speak softly, then he is exempt from giving rebuke. So if a person cannot speak softly when giving rebuke, when he's exempt, right? It's a mitzvah to give your rebuke, but in this case, since you're not allowed to speak harshly and one cannot speak softly, it's a person's nature that he can't speak softly, then in that case, a person is exempt. Now there are many different sayings in the Gemara. It's a mitzvah to give rebuke only if the person will listen to it. If a person will reject it and will not listen to it, then you're not supposed to give rebuke. It will fall on deaf ears. And they say that tzaddikim, they value and they desire rebuke, while the foolish people, they reject it and disdain it. But that is even in the context of giving tochacha, admonishment, for committing a sin. And even when doing so in private, that is, although one is required to rebuke a sinner, the Torah warns one not to speak with the sinner even in private in a harsh manner to the point of embarrassing him. Now, when it's prohibited to shame another person, even when there are two mitigating factors, right? We just enumerated them, right? When one is fulfilling a mitzvah of tochacha, reprimanding the person for committing a sin, and when he's doing so in privately, right? If those two cases, if you're fulfilling those two factors, if you're prohibited from embarrassing that person, how much more so one may not shame him, and not in the context of giving rebuke, and when he is doing not doing so in private, but in the presence of others. And all this applies when their humiliation was not done in public. But if someone embarrassed another person publicly, and publicly means at least in the presence of three people, his sin is far more severe. Indeed, Chazal, the rabbis, excised such a person from the world to come, as they said in Masechet Bava Metzia, Daf 59a. Hamalbin et pnei chavero berabim, someone who embarrasses his fellow in public, ein lo chelek lo'olam haba, has no share in the world to come. Now, the Rambam in Hilchot Tshuva writes that one only forfeits his Chelek L'Olam Haba, portion in the world to come, only if one has a habit of embarrassing people in public like that, to the point of embarrassment. But if one does so one time, then he does not forfeit his portion in the world to come. That does not say that it's not any more forbidden than doing so as a habit. It's just as bad. But that is just what the Rambam writes. So now we're going to get into Haga'ah. That's an addition. The Chavetz Chaim is going to talk more about this sin of embarrassing people and elaborate. He's gonna bring into our vocabulary a phenomenon known as oisfirin. It's in Yiddish, and which literally means to follow through on a derogatory report, right? To prove that it's true, and he'll demonstrate through an example that how many prohibitions a person violates through trying to follow through and prove that his derogatory report is true. Okay. So v'dad el tzel olchin rachil matzui me'od lav zeh. Note that among those who speak rechilut, it is very common to humiliate people and violate this prohibition. Right? Rechilut is gossip. Right? When you're saying someone did something to this person, then in that case, it's much more common to humiliate a person and violate this prohibition. Al yedei ma shekorin b'lashon Ashkenaz oisfirin. Due to a phenomenon known in Yiddish, right? This is Lashon Ashkenaz that the people in Eastern Europe spoke, Yiddish, oisfirin, which literally means, as I said previously, to following through on a derogatory report to prove that it's true. I'll illustrate to you in this in Hebrew. So that you will come to appreciate how many Torah prohibitions are encountered as a result of this terrible practice of following through on Lashon Hara to prove that it's true. So the Chafetz Chaim will now present an example of this phenomenon of oisfiring, of following through, and mention all throughout the whole example the various negative and positive commandments that are violated. That is, let us say, Reuven tells Shimon, Levi diber alecha lefanai kol kach v'kach. Levi told such and such negative information about you. V'techef oved beReuven ze al lav delo telech rachil be'amecha. And Reuven thereby immediately violates the prohibition, do not go as a talebearer among your nation, because he causes Shimon to hate Levi. Lavin v'asin k'niskal le'el, as well as other negative and positive commandments enumerated above. V'Shimon ma'amin l'dvarav. Shimon, the person who hears this negative information from Reuven, in turn believes Reuven's words. V'hu oved over alav delo tisa shema shav. Thus transgressing the prohibition, do not bear a false report, which prohibits one from accepting Lashon Hara, v'shar lavin v'asin k'niskal el, as well as other negative and positive commandments enumerated above. V'achar kach k'shepogea b'Shimon b'Levi. Later, when Shimon meets Levi, v'hu matchil lecharfo le'avozoto, he starts to berate and humiliate Levi because he is infuriated by the negative comments that Levi purportedly said about him. And Shimon does transgress the prohibition, each of you shall not cause distress to his fellow. So we cannot justify Shimon's behavior by saying that Levi deserved abuse, since he had demeaned Shimon. For just because Shimon unlawfully believed the Lashon Hara that Reuven said about Levi, now thinks that Levi spoke Lashon Hara about him, does that make it permissible for him to aggrieve Levi? Of course not, because he does transgress the prohibition against verbally assaulting another Jew, right? Just because a person believed Lashon Hara that someone spoke about him, and does that make it any more permissible to violate another command of verbally assaulting another Jew? And by the way, does that make you any better? The fact that you believe Lashon Hara, are you any better than the person who spoke Lashon Hara about you? Right? just as it's forbidden to accept lashon hara and believe it, so it's just as forbidden to saying lashon hara. And now returning to the example, Levi omed umishatea. Levi now stands puzzled and asks Shimon, Alma velama ata mecharfeni. What is this about? Why are you berating me? Ad Shimon bikas'o misaper lo. He presses Shimon on the matter until Shimon in his fury tells Levi, Lama ganita oti lefnei Ruvain. Why did you disparage me before Ruvain? Mechi savur ata she'ani yodea. Do you think I do not know about it? Ve'alo Ruvain siper li. Why Ruvain told me everything he said about me. Ve'over hu gam kein alav delo telech rachil ve'gomer. By saying this, right, by saying what Ruvain said about, by saying what Ruvain reported to him, Shimon also transgresses the prohibition again of do not go as a talebearer, etc. Since he now causes Levi to be angry with Ruvain. Ruvain initially caused Shimon to be angry with Levi. Now Shimon causes Levi to be angry with Ruvain. It makes no difference that Ruvain had in fact told Shimon about what Levi said, for it is clear that in all the poskim, the halachic codifiers, that this prohibition of do not go as a talebearer applies to true statements as well. Levi then defends himself by saying, Reuven told you lies about me when he told you that I demeaned you, and you therefore are attacking me for no reason. Later, when Shimon meets Reuven, Shimon's Yetzer Hara convinces him to finish off the story business in the most decisive way. Kitov literally means in the best way possible. Ve'omer lo, and he says to Reuven, as a result of your lies, you provoked me to attack Levi for nothing. Alo Omer, why Levi claims lo hayu dvarim me'olam, that nothing you told me ever happened. Ve'avera goreret od avera, and this sin in turns leads to another sin. Ve'omer lo Reuven leShimon, and to prove to Shimon that his version of the events is true, Reuven tells Shimon, Lecha mi, come with me to Levi, v'tir'eh she'ani omer ele advarim b'fanav mamash. And you will see how I will repeat what I said to you right in Levi's face, and he won't have the gall, the audacity to deny the facts. So what now started is this phenomenon of oisfirin, of following through, proving that your derogatory report is true. And in keeping with the principle, when one wishes to contaminate himself with sin, heaven gives him the opportunity to do so, right? This is a famous Gemara in Shabbos, that if a person wants to commit a sin, Hashem won't stop him, and Hashem will give him the opportunity to do so. Shimon goes along with Reuven, and heaven arranges that he happens upon Levi. When they meet him, Shimon says to Reuven, Omer b'fanav, tell Levi to his face what you claimed he said about me. Reuven, edged on the challenge, assumes a brazen attitude and says to Levi, you told me such and such about Shimon. And once again he violates the prohibition of do not go as a talebearer, which, as mentioned above, applies to the truth statements as well. Immediately Levi's face turns white, causing Reuven to violate the prohibition, do not bear a sin because of him, which is the prohibition we just learned today. Which, as mentioned, prohibits one from humiliating another Jew. Then Levi answers, Emet dibarti. It is true that I said that. It's true that I said that negative information about Shimon. אבל לא באופן זה ובניגון זה אמרתי. But I did not say it in that way or in that tone of voice. כי ידוע, for as we know, כי כמה דברים משתנים בתנועה אחת. A single gesture can transform the meaning of a person's words. Right? It's very well-known truth that if you write something, right, all matters about the punctuation, how you deliver your sentence or communication. It all matters the gesture and the tone of voice. If Shimon mashiv, nevertheless Shimon responds, Ata af im tachshiv elef pa'amim. At this point, even if you denied 1,000 times, lo aminecha, I still will not believe you. Acharei she'amar dvarim b'fanecha, now that Reuven said it in front of you. Over gam kein od alav delo tisa shema shav. By accepting the lashon hara, Shimon violates once again the prohibition of do not bear a false report. Right? Previously he accepted lashon hara from Reuven, and now he's accepting it once again, and he violates the prohibition once again. For as I will explain below, it is biblically forbidden to believe lashon hara under any circumstances, even when Reuven confronts Levi with the lashon hara, and he does not deny it. Even when the person who spoke lashon hara about you does not deny that he spoke lashon hara about you, you're still not permitted to believe it. For just because the wicked person Reuven assumes an attitude of impudence and brazenness and repeats his words in front of Levi, does the prohibition against accepting lashon hara, do not bear a false report, become permitted? Why? Levi defended himself by asserting that his words were misinterpreted. This will be elaborated on below, God willing, right? This concept of not believing lashon hara even when the person does not deny that he spoke lashon hara about you. In Klal 7, Sif 2. Right? The fact that a person does not deny that he spoke lashon hara, does that make you permitted to violate the prohibition of do not bear a false report? This applies all the time. It does not apply. There are no exceptions. Oh, if he actually spoke lashon hara about you, then you're allowed to believe it. No. The fact that he does not deny that he spoke lashon hara about you doesn't make it any more permitted to believe that. Believe his lashon hara. So the Chafetz Chaim just presented a very good example of where each of the three characters, right, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, each violated several biblical commands. I'm guessing it's a common occurrence. I mean, not exactly every detail of this story occurs commonly, but the gist of it is something that happens often. So the Chafetz Chaim concludes, you can now see how many of the prohibitions we mentioned above come about as a result of people's affinity to this parable practice of oisfirin, of following through. Had this Reuven fellow followed the ways of Hashem, blessed is he, even after committing his original rechilut of relating to Shimon what Levi had said about him, when Shimon returned with Levi's denial and accused him of lying about what Levi had said, Reuven should have kept quiet and accepted Shimon's allegation, and allowed Shimon to suspect him of being a liar about the incident with Levi. Lo leilach im Shimon etzel Levi, rather than going with Shimon to confront Levi, lo sif avonot al avon harishon derechilut, thereby accumulating additional sins on top of his original sin of rechilut. De yishmereni b'midah grua zot. May Hashem protect us from this terrible practice. Now, the Chafetz Chaim said that Reuven should have kept quiet when Shimon came and said that Levi never said the words that you said that he said about me. That didn't make sense. But anyways, Reuven should have kept quiet when Shimon came back with Levi's denial, and accepted Shimon's allegation, even if this would cause Shimon to suspect him of being a liar. Now, the Chafetz Chaim rules also in the future in Klal 10, Safe 17, that if Shimon suspects Ruvain of wronging him and he accuses him of doing so, Ruvain is allowed to defend himself by saying that he was not the one who did it. Right? He's allowed to say, I didn't steal what you said I stole, someone else stole it. But you're not allowed to relay who stole it, right? You're allowed to defend yourself, but you're not allowed to relay. But in this case, since Ruvain was the initial instigator, right? He was the one who said the rechilut. In that case, he has to keep quiet, even if that causes Shimon of suspecting him of being a liar. And then, I know it's already quite a lot, but we're going to quickly finish Save 15. It's very short. How it's forbidden to speak Lashon Hara about an orphan or widow, and one who does so violates yet another prohibition. Ve'im ayu yetom almana, if the subject of one's Lashon Hara is an orphan or widow, afilu hem asharim, then even if they are wealthy, sbir genoto b'fneihem, speaking of their faults in their presence, over or adlav achad acher, violated another prohibition of who kol almana v'yatom lo ta'anun, namely that do not afflict any widow or orphan. Sheziru atorah bazeh, for with this prohibition the Torah cautions a person shelo leaknitan or leachiv liban beshuv min hatzar. Do not Torah cautions a person not to distress or cause any pain to an orphan or widow. Ve'anshu beforash betorah, the prohibition for someone who transgressed this prohibition is stated explicitly in the Torah, right? Someone who violates this prohibition of causing pain to an orphan or widow, Hashem, what does He say? And my anger will flare against you, and I will kill you. So, what does one do in the case of a person has to rebuke an orphan or widow, right? If you're a rebbe, or if you're a teacher, and you have to rebuke your student, and he's an orphan, or what do? The Rebbe should rebuke him, but he should rebuke him in a different manner than he rebukes his other students. He should rebuke him more softly and with greater mercy and honor. And that is, thank you for listening, and bearing with me. We'll see you next time. Thank you.